Invasive species has seen historic success in the Everglades.
As Fox 35's Carla Byron explains, it's helping to remove Burmese pythons from the wild in record numbers.
When Florida revealed its plan for eradicating the Burmese python, the world couldn't believe it. It sounded like the biggest joke of the century, like the start of another disaster. But behind the jokes and headlines was a desperate plan to save an ecosystem on the edge of collapse, a plan so strange it might actually work. Before dismissing it as madness, ask yourself, what crisis could push scientists this far? What truth were they chasing? Stick with us to the end, because the answer will stun you. Before we uncover the truth, we first need to understand the nightmare that pushed them to take such a desperate risk.
Go. Oh, nice.
The apocalypse no one saw coming. Long before anyone noticed the crisis, Florida's $31.5 billion ecosystem was being devoured from the inside out. And by the time scientists realized what was happening, 99% of some animal populations had already vanished into thin air. Before the invasion, the Everglades were a masterpiece of balance. Sawgrass rippled under the sun. Shallow waters shimmered like glass. Herons sliced the air with their wings. Raccoons foraged in the reeds, and bobcats stalked unseen through the brush. Every movement fit into a rhythm that had lasted for thousands of years until that rhythm broke. The disaster began with two events that collided decades ago. In 1992, Hurricane Andrew tore across southern Florida with winds so powerful they shredded entire neighborhoods and leveled a reptile breeding facility near Miami. Dozens of exotic snakes escaped into the wild. Around the same time, overwhelmed pet owners, unable to handle their massive Burmese pythons, released them into the swamps, thinking they were setting them free. At first, no one saw the danger. A few scattered sightings here and there, a python on a back road, another pulled from a canal, seemed harmless enough. But beneath the surface, a silent invasion was gathering strength. Today, experts estimate between 100,000 and 300,000 Burmese pythons now crawl through South Florida's wetlands. But you would wonder, how did we get this outrageous number? Each female can lay nearly 100 eggs during the breeding season, hidden deep in the undergrowth where no one can find them. By the time the hatchlings emerge, there's no stopping them. The numbers that followed stunned researchers. Raccoon populations plummeted by 99.3%. Opossums dropped by 98.9%. Bobcats fell by 87.5%. Marsh rabbits nearly disappeared altogether. And in some areas, deer sightings collapsed by more than 90%. The ecosystem that once pulsed with life now echoed with just the pythons. And as officials searched desperately for solutions, nothing seemed to work because the apocalypse had already arrived, quiet and creeping, consuming everything in its path. The solution that meant much. Florida threw everything it had at the python invasion, from weekend warriors to elite hunters with cutting-edge technology, and after removing over 23,000 snakes in nearly a decade of brutal effort, scientists discovered they hadn't even scratched 1% of the actual population. The battle began in 2013, when officials launched the first Florida Python Challenge, a desperate 10-day event inviting anyone brave enough to hunt these silent predators. It was part competition, part survival mission. Volunteers waded waist-deep through the Everglades, machetes and snake hooks in hand, hoping to save their state one capture at a time. By 2024, the challenge had become a nationwide spectacle. 857 participants from across the United States and Canada joined the hunt, capturing 195 pythons. The winner walked away with a $10,000 grand prize, and headlines celebrated the event as a victory. But behind the cheers, biologists knew the truth. These numbers were barely a ripple in an ocean of scales. Then came 2025. Taylor Stanberry broke records by catching 60 pythons, the highest in the event's history.
I love snakes, and the only reason I'm euthanizing these Burmese pythons is because they are invasive and they are ruining the Everglades and the native wildlife here. So if you want to hunt pythons, just do it for the right reasons. Don't do it because it's fun or you want to hunt something, do it because you actually love Florida and its wildlife and ecosystem.
A total of 294 snakes were pulled from the wetlands that year. But even that historic success hit a darker reality. While hunters celebrated in front of cameras, tens of thousands more pythons were breeding unseen, their eggs tucked beneath roots and reeds. But it didn't stop there. Florida's war effort soon turned professional. The South Florida Water Management District hired 24 elite python hunters, paying them $8 to $10 per hour to stalk the swamps year-round. High-tech warfare followed. Robotic rabbits that emitted heat and scent to lure the snakes, specially trained dogs sniffing out scent trails, and drones scanning from above for movement under the canopy. Biologists fitted raccoons and opossums with GPS collars to detect predator hot zones. They even turned pythons against themselves, implanting scout snakes with radio transmitters to lead researchers to hidden breeding females through pheromone tracking. It became an ecological chess game, humans against a reptile that refused to lose. Since 2017, professional contractors have removed more than 23,000 pythons from the wild, but experts estimate that's less than 1% of the total population. Every time a hunter pulled one from the mud, dozens more hatched somewhere else. Eventually, scientists began admitting what many had feared from the start: full eradication wasn't possible. The snakes had adapted faster than any technology, pushing northward into new habitats, crossing highways, and ignoring human boundaries entirely. This growing sense of defeat pushed Florida to the edge of something unthinkable. Because if technology, money, and manpower couldn't stop them, then maybe the answer wasn't about stopping them at all, but about changing the very rules of the battlefield itself. The invisible enemy within. While everyone focused on the giant pythons terrorizing the swamps, scientists discovered something far more terrifying. Hitching a ride inside them, an invisible microscopic passenger that was quietly spreading through Florida's native snakes and turning them into walking graveyards from the inside out. This silent passenger didn't slither into Florida on its own. It came embedded in the Burmese python invasion. Once the snakes established themselves, their droppings seeded the wetlands with worm eggs. Cockroaches fed on the waste, lizards and frogs ate the cockroaches, and when native snakes swallowed those prey, they unknowingly ingested the true threat. Inside the host, the larvae burrowed through the stomach and traveled into the lungs. There they grew and fed, draining the snake's strength one breath at a time. For smaller native species like rat snakes, king snakes, and ribbon snakes, infection was often a death sentence. The parasites consumed blood and tissue, leaving open wounds and choking the host from within. Breathing became a struggle. Movement slowed, some starved to death because they could no longer hunt. Researchers soon began finding native snakes in horrific conditions. Lungs filled with mucus, tissue eaten away, some with dozens of worms writhing inside. In the most disturbing cases, the creatures crawled out through the snake's mouth after death. What began as isolated incidents turned into a statewide crisis. 18 native snake species in Florida have now tested positive for Rhyliatiella orientalis. The parasite's reach extends through dozens of counties, as far north as Jacksonville, and is steadily creeping toward the Panhandle. The pythons may have brought it, but the lungworm no longer needs them. It's moving freely through Florida's own native snakes, spreading silently from prey to predator across the food chain. And the consequences are devastating. As native snakes die, rodents multiply unchecked, small predators lose their food sources, and the ripple of imbalance spreads through every level of the ecosystem. Scientists warn that even if every python were captured tomorrow, the lungworm would remain entrenched, invisible, and unstoppable. In a strange twist, one native species, the Florida cottonmouth, seems almost immune to the parasite's attack, and no one knows why. There's no cure, no treatment, and no clear way to contain it. Each infected snake releases more parasites into the wild, each death leaving the ecosystem weaker than before. What began as a battle against giant snakes had morphed into something far more complicated, and as this invisible plague spread through the very species meant to keep Florida's wild in balance, officials realized they were fighting on two fronts now and losing both wars simultaneously. The plan that broke the internet. When Florida's wildlife officials stood before cameras and announced they were releasing hundreds of snakes into the wild to fight the python invasion, the internet exploded with mockery so intense that late-night comedians couldn't write jokes fast enough.
The Burmese Python. Jesus, change it back, change it, change it, change it, change it.
And within hours, the state became a global punchline for what critics called the dumbest environmental decision in modern history. Doesn't Florida have enough snakes already? Fighting snakes with more snakes? What could go wrong? It was chaos. News outlets compared it to the mongoose disaster in Hawaii, where introducing one species to control another only made things worse. Nervous residents wondered if their pets, or worse, their children, were next on the menu. Even seasoned wildlife enthusiasts shook their heads, wondering if the state had lost its mind. After years of headlines about python hunts and eradication efforts, this move looked like a complete contradiction. But beneath the noise, the truth was far different. The snake Florida was releasing wasn't a new villain, it was a forgotten hero. The eastern indigo snake was the only species in North America capable of hunting down and devouring venomous snakes, rattlesnakes, copperheads, and even coral snakes without fear or harm. Growing up to 9 feet in length, it remains the longest native snake in the United States. When it moved, it didn't slither so much as it flowed, sliding effortlessly through tall grass or disappearing into sandy burrows as if the earth itself opened to let it pass. Its scales shimmered with deep shades of black and blue, catching the sunlight in waves of color that gave it an almost metallic living glow. Around its throat, a faint coral tint marked it as something rare and regal. Despite its power, the indigo snake was non-venomous and surprisingly gentle toward humans. But in its own world, it was a fearless apex predator. Its menu said everything about its dominance: birds, frogs, lizards, rodents, turtle eggs, and most impressively, other snakes. Logging, farming, and urban growth erased nearly 97% of its habitat by the late 20th century. In 1978, the U.S. government listed the eastern indigo as a threatened species, the first snake in the country to ever receive that protection. But its decline wasn't caused by habitat loss alone. People had collected them for the pet trade, and during old rattlesnake roundups, hunters would pump poison gas into gopher tortoise burrows to flush out rattlesnakes. The indigo did not bother constricting its prey, it pinned it down or swallowed it alive. And long before humans tried to fix Florida's ecosystems, this serpent had quietly done that job on its own. What the public mocked as reckless was, in reality, a plan decades in the making. It wasn't about flooding the wild with more snakes. It was about restoring the balance that humans had shattered. What looked like chaos was actually a return to order. Instead of fighting nature with force, scientists were trying to let nature heal itself. The emperor's story stood at a crossroads between what once was and what might be restored, carrying the memory of ancient forests and the promise of a balance that could return. But before that could happen, scientists had to answer one critical question. Could they bring this legendary predator back from the brink before it was too late? If you've been following this story so far, hit that like button to help this incredible comeback reach more people who still think Florida's war with nature is hopeless, because what happens next will change everything. The careful release. Bringing back a nearly extinct apex predator isn't something done on impulse. The scientists working to resurrect the eastern indigo snake spent more than a decade crafting a process so deliberate that every single snake released into the wild had gone through what they called head starting, a crucial stage that often meant the difference between survival and death in Florida's harsh wilderness. This long journey began far from the wild inside facilities like the Orion Center for Indigo Conservation, working closely with the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission. For years, teams studied every detail of the indigo's life, its genetics, diet, behavior, and preferred habitat. What emerged was not a quick fix, but a plan forged through patience and precision. Adult snakes in these facilities laid eggs that hatched into small, shining replicas of their parents, vivid blue-black hatchlings that would one day reclaim the forests. But they weren't released right away. Instead, they entered the head starting program. Think of it as giving a young child years of safety, education, and nourishment before sending them into the world. For 1 to 2 years, these young indigos lived in protected enclosures where predators, disease, and hunger couldn't touch them. They were fed regularly, monitored closely, and grew rapidly, reaching lengths of 4 to 5 feet. A hatchling released too early would stand no chance in the wild, but a strong, confident young adult had a fighting shot at survival. Selecting where to release them was another science entirely. Biologists didn't just pick random woodlands. They chose carefully restored sanctuaries, like the Apalachicola Bluffs and Ravines Preserve in northern Florida. These were reborn ecosystems, where longleaf pines once again stretched toward the sky and the gopher tortoise, a keystone of the southern landscape, thrived. The tortoise's burrow was more than a shelter. It was an underground fortress providing safety, steady temperature, and refuge for hundreds of species. For the indigo snake, those burrows were essential. Without them, it couldn't survive the fires, cold snaps, or predators that defined its world. When release day came, the mood was reverent. Each released snake carried a small, harmless radio transmitter, a lifeline for data that allowed scientists to track its movement week by week. They were called the Judas snake. Those faint electronic signals told stories of adaptation, proof that the snakes were exploring, hunting, and surviving. In the first years, success wasn't measured in headlines or fanfare, but in the soft, rhythmic beeps of transmitters buried deep in the forest. And with every signal that came through, biologists held their breath, praying the experiment would work before the critics could claim they were right all along. And before we move on, share this video with your friends, because the real story isn't just about snakes. It's about what happens when nature finally decides to fight back. Nature strikes back. Deep in Florida's wetlands, researchers tracking a 13-foot, 52-pound male python named Loki expected nothing more than a routine update on his breeding movements. Fitted with a GPS tracker, Loki had been part of a long-term study on python behavior. For weeks, his signals showed steady movement toward what scientists believed was a nearby female. But when they finally closed in on his location, what they found left them speechless and sent shockwaves through Florida's entire wildlife research community. Loki's enormous body lay sprawled in the grass, his massive head chewed off and hidden beneath a bed of pine needles. No one could explain what had happened. For days, the mystery deepened, until a nearby trail camera finally revealed the culprit no one saw coming. The killer wasn't a human, a rival python, or even an alligator. It was a bobcat, an animal weighing barely 25 pounds that had somehow taken down a predator more than twice its size. Wildlife experts were stunned. This was the first recorded case in Florida's history where a native bobcat had successfully killed an adult Burmese python, and Loki's death was only the beginning. Across Florida, cameras and field reports started revealing more signs that nature itself was pushing back. Alligators were caught on video swallowing smaller pythons. Eastern indigo snakes were filmed devouring juvenile pythons in restored habitats. Even the elusive Florida panther had been documented taking down these invaders. For decades, pythons had seemed unstoppable, ghosts of the swamp that devoured everything from rabbits to deer, leaving silence where life once thrived. They had become the ultimate symbol of imbalance. But now nature is beginning to recalibrate. Every strike from a bobcat, alligator, or indigo snake wasn't just an act of survival. It was proof that the ecosystem was slowly remembering how to defend itself. Of course, recovery doesn't happen overnight. A single bobcat can't erase 20 years of devastation. One indigo snake can't balance the scales against thousands of breeding pythons. Every time a predator strikes, dozens more hatch somewhere in the swamp. This war will never be won in a single moment, only in small, patient victories that hint at hope. And as cameras kept capturing these stunning reversals, one burning question remained. What about those indigo snakes everyone mocked? Were they finally proving their worth in the wild? The solution that silenced the critics. In the autumn of 2023, something extraordinary happened deep in Florida's longleaf pine sands that silenced every critic who mocked the state's snake plan. Trail cameras at the Apalachicola Bluffs and Ravines Preserve captured footage of two wild-born hatchlings, tiny, glimmering eastern indigo snakes that nobody expected to see. For the first time in nearly half a century, This legendary species had reproduced in the wild in North Florida. For years, scientists had poured everything into keeping this dream alive. They bred snakes in captivity, tracked their movements with transmitters, checked burrows, and waited, hoping nature would finally take the lead. Progress often felt fragile, like holding something so delicate it might vanish at a breath. But that fragile hope solidified the moment those hatchlings appeared. When biologists confirmed that one of the young snakes had no tracking tag, proving it was born outside human care, it changed everything. As 2024 turned into 2025, the story only grew brighter. Researchers began spotting more indigos across the restored habitats, some 6-foot males gliding confidently through the scrub, others identified from previous release years roaming new territories. A female from the 2019 release still thrived, marking 6 years of survival in the wild. And it wasn't just Florida. In Alabama, conservationists recorded their own milestones. In 2019, the first wild-born indigo snake in decades was found, a sign that the restoration methods were spreading beyond state lines. By 2025, 44 new snakes had been released there, adding to more than 500 reintroduced across their native range. Behind these numbers lies the true heart of recovery, the land itself. The longleaf pine ecosystem once stretched across nearly 90 million acres of the American South. Today, barely 3% remains. That sliver of wilderness still shelters hundreds of animal species and more than 900 native plants, including 29 considered threatened or endangered. Restoring it has been a colossal effort. Conservation teams spent years replanting native vegetation, clearing invasive plants and reviving gopher tortoise burrows, the underground lifelines shared by so many forest creatures. Now, with wild-born indigos gliding through those same burrows, it's clear the land is finally responding. The ecosystem isn't just being repaired, it's beginning to function again. No one claims this miracle will wipe out Florida's invasive pythons. The indigos alone can't do that. No single species could. But what they can do is shift the balance, preying on young pythons, competing for food, and reclaiming ground lost to the invaders. Sometimes the greatest solutions aren't about fighting harder, but about stepping back and letting nature remember what it once knew. The truth that changes everything. What once looked like absolute madness has now become one of the most inspiring conservation success stories in modern history. When Florida first announced it would fight invasive snakes by releasing more snakes, the world laughed. But years later, the joke wasn't on Florida. It was on everyone who thought they understood nature better than nature understands itself. The truth is that healing a broken ecosystem takes something far more radical than killing the invaders. It requires restoring the system's ability to heal itself. For decades, many believed Florida's wildlands were too far gone, too damaged by human interference to ever recover. The idea of releasing another snake species into swamps already overrun with pythons seemed like madness. Yet that madness became the turning point. The python problem hasn't vanished. Their numbers still stretch into the hundreds of thousands. But the difference now is that the ecosystem finally has a fighting chance it never had before. Native predators are learning, adapting, and striking back. Restored habitats are giving wildlife room to breathe and recover. And across the wetlands, the $31.5 billion ecosystem that once seemed beyond saving is slowly regaining its pulse. While hunters focused on control, scientists focused on balance, and together, without realizing it, they began to restore what had been lost. In Florida's case, that answer came from another snake, not because snakes are magical, but because balance itself is. Understanding and respecting that balance isn't just the key to saving Florida's wild. It's the only way forward for a planet we've pushed too far. But the real question now is, can this fragile success grow strong enough to last? Will the indigos finally establish a population that no longer needs our help? Or will history repeat itself once again? Drop your answer in the comments section below. And if you believe nature still has a few miracles left to show us, subscribe and turn on notifications. Because the next story waiting beneath the surface might be even more unbelievable than this one. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.